The Boys has reached an insane amount of critical acclaim with its third season, so much so that I really don't even need to give it an introduction, so I'm gonna get straight to the point. What made this show so fun when it first burst onto the scene was the way in which it took the superhero formula and changed it into something different. Obviously, this isn't a revolutionary idea since Watchmen already exists, but this felt like a much more modern, spiritual successor with a different tone and different goals. And no matter how people might feel about Season 2, and especially Season 3, it never takes away from the sole appeal of this show right from the outset. It's a superhero story, but it's extremely gory, very dark, and comedically driven. Insanely over the top and unpredictable. It has a scene where a man gets his head crushed by having his face sat on by a woman with super strength. There's a guy who gets blown up by having a bomb placed in his ass. A parody of Aquaman abducts a dolphin and accidentally sends it flying out of his window onto oncoming traffic. This might seem tacky and kind of edgy, but I found it refreshing for the simple fact that it was different from everything else. Rather than being a superhero show focused on heavy action, it was a satirical shitpost that had a lot to say about both the entertainment industry and the current state of American politics. But as the show went on, the quality waxed and waned. Season 2's thematic focus almost entirely centers around commentary on virtue signaling. We throw out an interesting and compelling villain that had a lot of potential, without so much as a single fight, in favor of what is essentially the worst character probably ever. An extremely on-the-nose, unsubtle, tacky commentary on the alt-right with a jarringly out-of-touch depiction of what these Nazis are actually like. The Boys is one of those shows that really likes to take jabs against the MCU and DCEU for their corny dialogue, then fully embrace dialogue that is just as cringeworthy. Yeah, I guess this headline is only cringy when it's the big corporation saying it and not us, a show that definitely isn't owned by a big corporation. Make no mistake, I don't think wokeness or even a lack of subtlety is what's currently wrong with The Boys. It's hard for people to truly identify what went wrong with this show, or at the very least why it keeps defaulting back on weak writing choices, despite showing that it is capable of good writing. Characters like Stan Edgar feel like an extremely nuanced take on the way in which CEOs and corporate executives abuse the system, managing to humanize a man who is, by all accounts, completely terrible and corrupt in every way. And that's the thing. Homelander's continuous descent into madness and dependence on the validation of others, the Deep's vulnerable self-discovery shedding light into why he abuses women, A-Train's addiction. So many villains in the show have layers to them that make them what they are, when they aren't reduced to cheap commentary on something the writers clearly don't understand. I go into more detail about my problems with the show on a podcast that will be up on the second channel once the new season drops, but I am indisputably a fan. I'm able to look past the parts that make me cringe and really see what makes this show special, but that becomes a bit harder with every passing day. I don't want to be the guy that puts Season 1 on a pedestal while effectively discounting the rest of the show, because half the time people who do completely forget about what was actually present in Season 1 simply because it was less obvious. People decry this show as going woke, when the first season had the most on-the-nose commentary on fake feminism and the piss-poor ways that corporations handle sexual assault when it affects big names. People claim that Huey and Starlight's relationship was ruined, when, to be honest, the dialogue between them has always felt jarringly unnatural.
Because I can get you a commemorative cup, or I can get you an Ezekiel figurine, or a goodie bag.
My girlfriend died.
What?
This relationship sucks. People claim that the show became the very thing it swore to destroy, and in many ways they're right, but that was kind of the problem since the first episode. What made Season 1 so strong for me was the tight way in which it presented its narrative. It had a place to go, every episode felt like another step in that direction. Our heroes find out more about the corruption brought up by Vought, and the picture becomes more and more clear as the series runs its course. But on top of that, it also felt insanely creative. This show was interesting to me primarily because it centered around a group of people who, save for Kimiko, did not have powers, which meant that they had to use their brains to take out members of Vought. The best episode was definitely the one where they had to figure out how to kill Translucent, a man with skin harder than diamond. Plus they had a time limit, meaning that they couldn't starve him out. So they decided the best method was to shove a bomb up his ass. It's absurdly disgusting, mildly amusing, somewhat morbid, and insanely strategic all at the same time. Moments like this emphasize well the raunchy but charmingly clever personality the series is known for, but as the series runs along, it slowly runs out of these big brain strategy moments in favor of much more shonen anime fights, which yes, were definitely cool but weren't really what I wanted. Don't get me wrong, some of the interpersonal drama and symbolic meaning definitely justify the use of having our heroes take Temp V in Season 3, but it never once gets in touch with the strongest aspect of Season 1, and considering virtually nothing changes in the season finale, it gets harder and harder to feel motivated to tune into this show. But that's not really the main problem. The biggest issue with The Boys is everything surrounding it. The Boys has become one of the most ironic and somewhat hypocritical shows in recent memory. It's a show that claims to hate corny, lazy MCU dialogue, then includes just that. It's a show that claims to despise virtue signaling, only to write an alt-right villain that posts out-of-touch memes a person on 4chan wouldn't be caught dead with. It's a show that claims to hate the way in which we've sensationalized celebrities, and yet we're putting Homelander in Mortal Kombat 1 and Call of Duty. It's a show that tastefully calls out the racism in America, yet our token black hero is practically useless and given little time to shine even when the narrative directly involves him. But at least he wears a bunch of rap t-shirts. The issue is, I could overlook a lot of this as irresponsible mistakes, and it does seem like they made an effort to change some of these things. The plot thread of A-Train grappling with being an activist versus being successful was another fantastic highlight of Season 3, but the most egregious example of this kind of irresponsibility is the way in which the show blatantly criticizes the cowardice of big corporations and their inability to hold celebrities accountable for their shitty actions, and yet there has not been a single statement on Tomer Capone's blatant Zionism, something that 100% contradicts everything this show stood for. Eric Kripke proudly announced that the show is going to get way more than just 5 seasons, and I don't think that's particularly a good thing. You have to keep in mind, this is the same guy who did Supernatural, a show that is notorious for going on way longer than it should have, and that's kind of what worries me. Rather than focusing on the core of what made this show such a breath of fresh air, it's picking up the cash cow habits that ruined the MCU in the first place. An overabundance of content, product placements and cheap cash grabs, and a streamlined story that almost becomes repetitive in execution due to a distinct lack of risks. Don't even get me started on the god-awful high school drama they made as an excuse to build more of the world. A fuck ton of it is just an excuse to point at Soldier Boy and Homelander and say, hey, it's the character you like. Remember? Like, how is that not the most MCU fucking move imaginable? There definitely are glimpses of fun and inventive ideas, especially in Season 3. I know that some people are going to cringe when I say this, but one of my favorite scenes is actually the short dance number that Kimiko plays out in her head. Someone said this is insanely cringe, but they also said Dark Souls 2 is good, so the reason I find this more compelling than most other parts of this season is the fact that I didn't expect it, and they included it so unapologetically. It's just effortlessly endearing, and it's scenes like that that kept me guessing through the whole experience, and I found it to be much more entertaining than the obnoxious anime fight at the end or any of the forced drama surrounding this terrible child actor. This kid sucks. His acting sucks. I know I'm beefing with a child here, but there are good child actors, and this is not one of them. Season 4 is kind of my only hope for the show, but it really just depends on how well they pull it off. I already expect it to be a series that flips between good and bad writing on a dime, since that's essentially already what we've been promised, and honestly part of what makes the show work. Including this much variety inevitably guarantees that some of the ideas you include won't work, and that's okay, but too much of a good thing can be detrimental to the experience, and I would hate to see this series become as shallow as the current state of the MCU. I need Season 4 to remind me why I cared about it to begin with, and give me something new, something fresh and different that isn't just relying on the popularity it already had. Granted, it will be having the only good part of the Watchmen movie, the actor who plays the comedian, so I'm sure there will be at least something worthwhile in Season 4, but with how dependent the show is on the presence of Homelander, it's starting to become worrisome that the show will inevitably end up being a repetitive slog of a series, heavily discussed and completely forgotten by everyone.